My name is Esteban Reyes, and I will be addressing and discussing and presenting on the Times Beach disaster, which was a major environmental crisis that occurred in Times Beach, Missouri, in the early 1980s. The town became infamous after it was discovered that large amounts of dioxin, a highly toxic chemical, had been sprayed on the roads for dust control in the early 1970s. The contamination came from waste oil mixed with industrial byproducts, including dioxin, which was sprayed by a local contractor. In this presentation, I will discuss the environmental tragedy of Times Beach, one of America's most significant toxic contamination incidents. The goal is to use this visual data to explain how poor hazardous waste handling led to the town's contamination with dioxide, a byproduct of Agent Orange. It also looks into the response to the disaster in terms of public health, the long term environmental cleaning up, and the influence of the disaster on the U.S. environmental policy. Through maps, graphs, and charts, this presentation aims to 1. Identify the sequence of contamination events, 2. Illustrate the human and environmental impacts using data, and 3. Assess the federal response and cleanup efforts that turned into a toxic town into a state park. Here we are, the table of contents. So we'll discuss dioxin levels over time, reported health impacts, cleanup site summary and cost, EPA Superfund budget, and then we will finalize with a summary and some reflections. So Times Beach was located near the Merrimack River and along historic Route 66, southwest of St. Louis. The town's unpaved roads made it vulnerable to dust problems, leading officials to hire waste hauler Russell Bliss in the 1970s. Bliss unknowingly sprayed dioxin contaminated oil from the NEPA chemical facility in Verona, Missouri, across the community. The contamination spread to the surrounding areas, including horse farms, arenas, and multiple counties. This specific map highlights the primary contamination sites across Missouri, particularly the 27 locations later included in the Superfund cleanup. The Merrimack River, which flooded in December of 1982, likely accelerated the spread of toxins throughout the town. Soil tests conducted in Times Beach revealed dangerously high levels of dioxin, a byproduct of Agent Orange. In 1974, dioxin contamination was suspected in areas where Bliss had sprayed. By 1982, official EPA testing showed concentrations up to 300 parts per billion, 300 times the CDC's safety threshold of 1 ppb. These findings solidified the town's fate and promoted a complete federal evacuation. The line graph here traces the increasing awareness and measurement of contamination over time, underscoring the town's growing health risks. Residents of Times Beach began reporting unexplained illnesses in the early 1970s, especially after roads were sprayed. Cases included persistent respiratory problems, rashes, and unusually high rates of miscarriage and childhood sickness. Hundreds of animals died shortly after exposure, especially near farms and arenas sprayed by Bliss. This bar graph illustrates the severity of the health crisis. While exact numbers vary, the trend shows a widespread of growing impact on humans and animals leading up to the town's evacuation in 1983. The EPA's cleanup of Times Beach and 26 other Missouri sites were among the most extensive Superfund operations ever undertaken. The total cost exceeded 200 million and included incineration of over 265 tons of contaminated material, including entire buildings and the town's water tower. This table here summarizes key sites and their cleanup impact. Notably, all material was eventually buried in a town mound, and the area was later converted into Route 66 State Park. The EPA's Superfund budget for Times Beach prioritized soil incineration, which comprised 50% of expenditures. Additionally, went to staffing, testing, and public outreach. The pie chart here shows how the $200 million budget was used, demonstrating the massive scale of environmental remediation and federal commitment following one of America's worst contamination events. Overall, in the 1970s, Times Beach, Missouri was unknowingly contaminated with dioxin-laced oil sprayed to control dust on its unpaved roads. The town became a national symbol of environmental catastrophe after 1982 soil tests revealed dangerously high toxicity levels. In response, the federal government evacuated 2,200 and 3,000 residents in 1983 and launched a massive cleanup effort costing approximately $200 million. Contaminated materials were incinerated on site, and by 2001, the EPA officially moved Times Beach from the Superfund list. The former town was later converted into Route 66 State Park and declared safe for public use in 2012. Times Beach story catalyzed reforming hazardous waste regulations and strengthening environmental enforcement in the United States.